Here we have arrived at the Foundation Museum of Sa Bassa Blanca, created by Ben and Yannick Jacobert, my friends since 45 years. One of my first direct carving pieces that I did in, this actually is a white marble. I did this in Italy, in Pietrasanta, in a small workshop where I was allowed to work. And I learned basically my trade with the Italian carvers, Antoniazzi and his son. A little tiny workshop was my first experience working in marble. And we found this block, and it had three sides, something that would only be interesting for a direct carving. And so I took the inspiration, just simply I started one end and I ended up in another. This is a thinner side, the other side was larger, and it's kind of a dichotomy between a soft form and a more rigid form. Yeah, this back part is flat. It's patinaed by about 30 years of moss and ivy. This is imposed on the form, on the marble, embedded into it. And my good friend Ben Jacobert, who has this foundation museum, he said, don't clean it, let's leave it with the patina look. He liked it that way, and I agree with him. I think it has a nice feeling of passage of time. It's sort of an interesting view here, and you see the straight line, more of the masculine with a slight feminine side to the right, and then the more fecund three-dimensional form on the left. Now that I look at it, I suppose you could write about it that way. But when I made it, there was no reason to think. You just did. Direct carvings, that's the way you go about things in direct carving. In French, they call it taille directe. This block is interesting because the form was very difficult. So there are areas that are flat, and then that's the result. That's why they're kind of in a two-dimensional sense, and then it becomes three-dimensional as you go around. It's, again, one of my first carvings. It was an adventure as a young sculptor. You can still see the tool marks of the point here, but it's disguised by the patina of the ivy and the 30 years buried in the rainy field in Brittany, where I recuperated it after, I think, actually 40 years. It's kind of, you can see that it's been weathered. This is a later piece from the one we just looked at, and in marble. The one we looked at was in marble. This is in a soft French limestone called Pierre de Bruzet, and I did this several years after I had my first carvings. And it's more sophisticated, more intentional. There was an idea behind it, an emerging form. Again, it's direct carving. I didn't have a model, I just had an idea, and as the stone progressed, I should say as I removed material, more like take away, we take away material, and then these forms evolve out of what's left. That's direct carving. The difference between making a wax model or a clay model building up, in stone carving we take away. And you can take away after a model by copying an original plaster model, or you can do a direct carving, and that's what this is. This is, it's not a question of value, both are interesting, but they're just different approaches. Yeah, I find that this piece still has an interest for me. I think in seeing it again after so many years, where it was buried, basically covered with ivy, it's a joy to see it come back to life, and it still has the original effect on me after I'd finished it. In the beginning, I didn't know, I had a sort of general idea of what I was doing, but I wasn't sure. I just kind of let things happen, and I think it's quite successful. I can see here from this point of view, I could see a leg, a thigh, a backside, a back, and now that I look at it after 50 years, it seems to me kind of interesting. We work with the video and we making this different shots of the different angles of the sculptures here in this museum. I see it, with time I see really a conversation going on between my thoughts and the actual sculpture, the finished product, which really I've never done before we started this video. It's kind of interesting to see it in this, slowly to try to understand what's going on. Yeah. Eh bien, ça c'est un autre. This is another direct carving, a smaller one, soft form. I started getting closer to a more abstract, if you want, a more less spontaneous, perhaps, with the idea of a base and then the soft form on top. I guess it's the idea of something soft and something firm. We could many ways of thinking of that. You could think of it in perhaps you could beginning of the period that I did a whole bunch of the ideas based on a cloud and the billowing cloud. This is probably one of the earlier ones. Now looking in hindsight, I realized that maybe it was what I was thinking about at the time. Who knows? Yeah, this is called the Paysage de Dieu l'Art, or the landscape of the household gods. And it's something that will go on after many years, after I'm gone, after my passing. This will go on forever and be the same in 1,000 years as it will be in the next day. Made out of granite. The same, it won't depolish, the polish will still hold, and it's quite amazing to think about that this object which I made with an intention of creating a, I can't say a joke, but I mean kind of a sort of humorous interpretation of a domestic situation such as a kitchen in black granite. All we're missing is the flames coming out of the little holes here which we had when we had the show, because this is the cooking area of the landscape of the household gods. And we had the salt would go here. This was a mixing bowl. I mean, it was really a must-have for every person in a house to have a kitchen, a 4.5-ton kitchen. This element here was to squeeze oranges. You cut the orange in half, you put it on top, you squish it around, it goes into this, there's a little hole here and a little hole here, and it comes out into a glass. In English we have an expression called, well, we have everything but the kitchen sink. But in this case I made sure that we have the kitchen sink, and this would have been the kitchen sink with water coming out from there and then coming here, and the drain is at the bottom. When I look at this piece in granite, I realize that this is going to be here forever. 1,000 years, 500 years. It'll still be here, and people will question, say, what is this? And one little girl the other day came by and she's looking at the piece. And she said, is this a game? I think that's what you could call this, a game. Wow. What a sculpture. I did this in October, a very sad moment in my life. Ben Jacobert commissioned me. And I worked in a quarry in October here in Mallorca. And I remember with the change of the sun, the angle of the sun, it started getting dark around 4:30. It was chilly. And it was a lonely experience. But I really like this piece. I haven't looked at it for a while. But I think it's quite successful. And I like the fact that it's coming out of the block. kind of fun. As the light changes on these elements in relief, from dark to light, and eventually they blend in with the background. And as the door would move open and close, these would look like they were moving because of the shadows that they created, each one different. And the idea was it was a bunch of bees, a group of bees flying up, maybe a hive moving to another hive.